Hey listeners, this is Mike Morford, co-host of Missing Persons, and I want to take a moment to introduce you to a new show brought to you by the creators of Gone Cold. It's called Of Hell, Texas True Crime, a podcast that walks the back roads of Texas after the police lights fade and the headlines die. It's a show about the killers who leave scorch marks on families, neighborhoods, and anyone who dares to remember. Killers whose crimes leave behind one burning question: are there more victims? Each episode follows the trail of a killer who thought they could bury the truth. But in Texas, secrets have a way of clawing back to the surface. You're about to hear a clip from Of Hell's second episode, the brutal killing of a working mother, a neighbor, a woman who was taken from her home and forced to endure torture before ultimately being slain by a madman called the Slayer Saint. If what you hear next gets its hooks into you, like it did me, subscribe to Of Hell, Texas True Crime wherever you're listening right now. Some folks aren't simply from hell, they're of it. Here's the preview of Hell, the Slayer Saint Part 2, Nancy.
At around 12:45 a.m. on September 16, 1970, Gene Mitchell was on his way home from work at Transwestern Oil Pipeline Company. It was quiet with almost no other vehicles on the road, nothing out of the ordinary for a sleepy town on a work and school night. The man worked a lot, and late, an exhausted cog in the big energy machine. Luckily, his drive home to 1057 Adams Street was short, just over 5 miles. When he pulled up to the house, Gene saw that several lights inside were on. He was pleasantly surprised. He rarely got to spend time on the weekdays with his wife and kids. Had Nancy waited up for him, he wondered. But as he entered the house, the one thing that caught his attention was the silence. "Nancy?" Gene said, his voice slightly elevated. There was no answer. He looked over at the sewing machine. The light was on. The fabric remained, draped between the presser foot and the throat plate. He could hear the slight buzz of electricity flowing through the machine as he drew nearer. Nancy's cigarettes and an ashtray with a partially smoked butt sat on the sewing table, and underneath, Gene noticed, were his wife's shoes. That was Nancy, always barefoot inside. "Nancy?" he called out again. Still nothing. Gene made his way around the house, the kitchen, the bathroom, the bedroom. The search didn't take long. The working-class family lived in a modest home, nothing fancy. His wife was nowhere to be seen. After waking the children, who'd been asleep in their bedroom, Gene asked where their mother was. They didn't know. Wasn't she home? They asked, confused. Gene traveled from room to room one more time and then took a look outside. Nothing. He called several relatives, none of whom had seen or heard from Nancy except her uncle, who told Gene that everything was fine when they spoke just a few hours before. The man became frantic. It was late, and the unlit homes spanning the entirety of this block attested to it. On any other night, it would be the kind of darkness that says everyone's asleep and nothing bad ever happens here. But not tonight. Tonight it, and the silence, were foreboding. Gene needed to know if anyone heard anything. Their slumber be damned. Next door, his groggy neighbor rubbed his eyes but snapped to attention at the line of questioning. "Gosh, no, I wouldn't know where she went," he told Gene. He'd heard a car door shut that night but hadn't noticed anything else, the neighbor said. Gene then questioned the man who lived across the street. He reported hearing a dog barking, but could tell the distraught man nothing else. Gene went on to speak with a few other neighbors, but none offered any answers. He stopped, if only for a second, trying to remain calm, trying to think. But no one else came to mind. There was no one else to talk to. After hours of searching in vain for his wife, Gene went back home and phoned the Winkler County Sheriff's Office to report her missing. 2 deputies arrived at the Mitchells' home within minutes. First, they took a look around the house. The officers noticed Nancy's shoes under the sewing table and the half-smoked cigarette, as if she'd been interrupted by a knock on the door and extinguished it before answering. They noticed her closet and drawers were full. She obviously hadn't packed up and moved on. Her purse, anyway, had been left behind, and the billfold found on the sewing table contained two $20 bills. It seemed robbery wasn't in the cards. One deputy jotted down Nancy's description. She was blonde with blue eyes and small. She stood only 5 feet 2 inches tall, weighed about 110 pounds, and was last seen wearing a double-knit avocado-colored dress. It was one of a kind, one that she had made herself. It was the only dress missing from her closet, and folks who saw her at the drugstore filling a prescription earlier in the night also saw her in that outfit. They'd later report to police. Before leaving the Mitchells, the patrolman checked the house once more, paying close attention this time to the windows, all of which were shut and locked, just like the back door. There were no signs of a struggle, let alone forced entry. After the police left, they too spoke with the neighbors but found out little more than Jean had. No one had seen or heard much of anything that night, certainly not the screams of a woman in distress. Police were already theorizing an abduction scenario and figured out the assailant either covered Nancy's mouth quickly or had her held at gunpoint. Friends and relatives flocked to the Mitchell home. They did their best to console Jean, but no one could, not really. He'd been sweet on Nancy since he could remember, even before they started dating in the 7th grade. They were engaged while in the 9th. The pit of Jean's stomach felt unbearably empty.